You know what? Mike linebacker. Let's try that too. How about that? We'll see if we can just, put him at cornerback. I know it's just, seeing like it's really hilarious to see how far they went to try to make it stick. In reality, it was like, all right, just let him play where he's really good at.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of From the Pink Seats podcast, here on the State of Louisville Podcast Network. I'm producer Keith. With me, as always, Vincent Lococo, Jacob Lane, Matt McGavic, and fellas, how we doing?
Well, I'm just hoping that the Bills find a way to come back from this 11-point deficit they find them in. I'm sure future me is going to be either ecstatic or very disappointed in what I'm doing right now. But
well, the refs have a very itchy trigger finger, and you just gave them the reason.
I know.
Also, way to date the pod when we're recording.
Yeah, exactly. Every week, man. I know. Well, I'm great. I'm not doing as good as Vince, though. That's for sure. The Babe over here. I'm here for it.
Yes. I'm rocking the Babe Ruth shirt. Definitely. I left a wild game cookout. I've been going since 1 o'clock. We are now recording since Matt's dating us. 8 o'clock on a Sunday. So I've been at a wild game cookout, eating everything from dove, duck, deer, wild boar. No, Keith. No, Rocky Mountain. No. But, Pastime Fish House every year. Matter of fact, it's Tommy Pass's 70th birthday today, so happy birthday to Tommy
Happy
Pass.
birthday.
So the owner, everybody talks about Mike Lennings and all these other fish houses. The fishery, Pastime Fish House. That's the best in the city.
Official fish house of From the Pink Seats podcast. How about that?
I don't know if this makes me a bad Louisvillian, but I've never been to Mike Lennings.
It doesn't, because Pastimes is better, so you're okay. No. So it's cash only. Food is amazing. People are amazing. But every year they do, at the end of hunting season, all the guys bring up what all they've cooked. They do some specialty meal and everything. My favorite was my boss did a barbacoa deer birria tacos on the grill out there. Dude,
come on now.
Let's
go.
Fucking insane.
Yeah.
Food was legit. Craziest thing I had was deer heart. So not sure on how you guys feel about that, but
very nutrient rich.
Well,
did indulge in some deer heart today.
Little sacrificing going on the show tonight. Okay, all right.
Do you want us to win the ACC or not?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I do. Thank you for your service.
You mentioned that. We were laughing about that. Ev from Barstool, Ohio State just won the national championship. He had paralysis in half his face the next day. Yeah, he was like, I'd take it every day for Ohio State to win it all. I'd take it every day. So that's what reminded me of that. I would eat deer heart any day of the week for us to win the ACC.
Scale from that to Vrabel, what he committed to do to win a Super Bowl. Where are we at on the get the Cards and ACC title?
10, anything, whatever.
What did Vrabel say? I'm not up to speed with this one.
Oh, that he'd cut his knob off to win a Super Bowl. He's
okay.
Like, I got kids. I think the exact quote. I got kids. I'm done using it at this point.
Oh my gosh, that's great. That's also like wasn't that the Notre Dame fan who said that he was going to follow through and chop his thing off, and he was still going to have to make his family negotiate with his wife.
They would eat dog shit.
He never did.
It was a wild year.
Yeah.
You know what? Shout out to the Kansas State fan who
helped
him.
Burrito boy,
man.
To
say that, and I had forgotten that happened until I mentioned that. Not only did that happen, but he actually went through with it.
Yeah. Don't look for any of that here.
I mean, yeah. I think I already did enough, Jacob, with eating bologna, egg, and cheese every Saturday for an entire football season. That was a lot.
You did, and now the entire world rests on Keith's combine drills, right? That's kind of the next step of this, right?
Blow the peck.
That's right. Well, speaking of food, it's really kind of a great jumping off point for this episode because as we continue along here and dive into the off season, we're looking back on the 2024 season for the Louisville football program. And tonight we're starting with our position breakdowns. And we've kind of done this a little bit differently this year than we have in years past, where we've looked at offense and defense separately or, gone position by position. Tonight we're going to group the trenches together, and we're going to get this thing kicked off with the group that in sports, I don't think there's a more underappreciated unit than the beefy boys, the big boys on the offensive and defensive line. These are the guys that every day they put on their hard hats, they come to work, they know that they're not going to get the credit, right? They're not going to get the limelight that a quarterback gets, that a running back gets. They got to go out there and they got to play the type of game that they're never going to touch the football. I mean, I can't look as a
we can only hope
football player, right? You can only hope, right? And tonight we're gonna get that's a little bit of a theme of this season. We're gonna obviously get into that, but for the offensive and defensive line, it's all about setting the tone of physicality and kind of establishing dominance, being a manly man, if you will. And as we look back on the season for Louisville football at the in the trenches on the offensive line and defensive line, it was certainly an interesting year, especially coming in with some of the hype that they had. So we'll get into all of that tonight from the Pink Seats podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to the show if you're not. What are you doing? Look at these handsome fellas right here. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button right here below us. As Keith said, give that thing a little tickle. It likes it. Get subscribed to the show. Turn those notifications on. Pause. And let's keep going into the offseason content here. We've got a lot more over the next couple of weeks. But, fellas, starting with tonight, a lot of storylines with the defensive line, but let's just kind of overall and offensive line. But when you look at this group for Louisville, Vince, I'll start with you first. What comes to mind with these two groups for their performance and what they meant to the kind of season for the Cards?
I thought it was improvement throughout the year. At the start of the season, we were definitely hating on the offensive and defensive line, but to see where they ended up was great. I have to commend Coach Owens and defensive line coach for just working with what they had and continuing to improve throughout the season. That's the name of the game, is you don't want to start the season how you finished, and not seeing production from guys like Thor Griffith definitely hurt at the beginning of the year, but to be able to see the production from them, I mean, towards the bowl game, we were like, damn, Thor's out the first half. That sucks. That's awful. So that's where we were towards the end of the season in comparison to the start of the season to where we were. Where is he at? Is he going to play? He's got a Harvard degree, but what else? So
it was a weird year where there were certain points in time where you would notice glaring flaws, especially like the tackle position was a big bugaboo on the offensive line for the whole year. We talked about it. But there were also aspects within the trenches that I thought were very good, like interior defensive line. I thought we had a phenomenal interior D over the course of the year. So it was sort of a weird sort of hodgepodge and trying to get pieces together to mesh, to play well. Like it took us until, the 7th, 8th game of the season to finally get an O-line combination that was actually working. One, just because of the team chemistry, and two, because of all the damn injuries we had having to work with a MASH unit. So a weird year is just how I can summarize it.
I think the year that I would probably, not the year, the word that I would use to describe them would probably be resilient, especially with the offensive line, just because, I mean, the injuries were well documented. We know that there were some struggles early on, especially at the tackle spot, and they kind of weathered that early to mid-season storm, and by the time the final month or so of the season came around, like, they were the strong suit, not only the strong suit of the offense, arguably. I mean, they're probably heading into the 2025 season as like one of the strongest position groups on the roster. And then with defensive line, sure, it wasn't as impactful as we thought it was going to be, especially early on when, we see the metrics and Ashton's getting pressures. He's getting in the backfield, but the sack numbers aren't nearly there. And then as the year went on, like, some of these guys collectively started to routinely get more in the backfield, provide more of a presence at the point of attack, and it was to the point where at the end of the year, the defensive line was looking a lot more like the defensive line of 2023. So I would probably say resilient, because whether it be due to injury or underperformance, they were able to overcome various bugaboos at the start of the year.
Yeah, look, not to steal a phrase from basketball, but I'm going to, the power of the unit, right? We hear that a lot these days with Coach Kelsey, and that is really what this group was all about this year, both offense and defense, right? You guys have mentioned it, a ton of injuries going all the way back to the beginning of the season, and in fall camp when Lance Robinson, who may not have been a starter, but was going to be probably very much used in the rotation, goes down in fall camp. then it was, guys going down left and right in terms of injuries and, not being able to hold their own within, at least on the offensive line, really struggles, particularly with Mendoza on the right side, right? So it was a need quickly to kind of pivot. And then on the defensive side, kind of got off to a start that was fool's gold, right? You have the 6-sack game against Austin Peay, and you kind of think that this is what you're going to get every game, and then after
Jacob's
that,
sack rate started off hot.
right? I'm like, here we go. Right? This is what I'm talking about. This is the type of pass rush that you're expecting, and then several of those players you don't see get another sack until later in the year, or some of them not even at all. So. It was a really up and down year. You had guys that were injured coming back into the rotation, and as they got healthy and as they found their groove, you saw what they could be. And it was really never about the star power, right? Because Ashton Gelati didn't have the year that you expected. On the offensive line, Monroe Mills was injured, right? Michael Gonzalez was kind of up and down. Like, I'm really interested to get into the numbers. They don't bear out too well for him, at least what I was kind of looking at from a glance. And then you have, Collins and Renato Brown in and out with injuries. It was really a glue it all together and figure out what works. And at the end, I don't think any of us had Trevante Sylvester as the starting left tackle, right? Like, I don't think any of us really thought that's where we were going to end up. And they figured it out. And on the defensive line, Renee Conga, Jordan Garrad, Des Tell, Jared Dawson up until his injury. Lot of guys that were productive, and it showed the power of the unit, and that's what this entire season was about for both of them. And too many times we've heard that U of L was too small, right? Not dominant enough. And despite not necessarily on paper having a ton of star power or, a ton of big names, not even really like a bunch of guys that were huge by any means. I mean, I know Jonathan Mendoza is a tall guy. They really held their own. They were not dominated. Look at the games, Clemson, Kentucky, against some of these bigger defensive, offensive lines. It's a great year for them, in my opinion.
I think a lot of that has to do with, coming off the ball, low off the line of scrimmage and their hand placement with a lot of the defensive line. Knowing Des Tell and Jared Dawson, watching them work, after practice, before dinner check, anything, they were literally just constantly in the weight room on – not sure what the machine's called, but there's a new machine they have on pretty much every college weight room where simulates, a person's body, and you see defensive line and offensive linemen just working on it constantly just to get their hand placement. And it might not be full speed, but I mean, it's just to get the hand placement there. And if you win the hands, a lot of times you win the reps. So I think that's what the D-line really hammered on, especially towards the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you saw experience, right? You saw, look at all the guys that did get out on the field this year for Louisville. I mean, there's a ton of them that played. Most of them were juniors and seniors and have played for 3, 4, 5 years. Obviously, you have Ramon Puryear, who breaks the record for most games played for Louisville. So it's really interesting to see kind of how these groups developed and how they were, able to kind of continue to find their groove and ultimately impact winning at the end of the year when it mattered. Just some stats. I want to run through this real quick. For Louisville, they had, I mentioned this throughout the year, they had a ton of guys that got sacks this season, 34 total sacks for the team. Out of the defensive line, you saw 10 different players record a sack this season. A number of those were only 1, 1.5, 2, whatever the case is. But whatever, when you look at that, you see that they could rotate in and out, right? They didn't have to play the same guys over and over again. They were able to get, different fronts in there. They would have fronts with Des Tell and Thor Griffith, or with Jared Dawson and with Jordan Garrad. I mean, they were able to get a number of different guys out there. And then with the, the edge at defensive line, they had Tramel Logan. They played Miles Jernigan. They played, obviously Ashton Gelati played a ton of snaps this year, but they had a number of guys that impacted and overall helped them finish 40th on the year in run defense, allowing almost 133 yards per game. From a sacks standpoint this season, as I mentioned, they didn't necessarily dominate, but they got after the quarterback. They got pressures, and it was evident, with Ashton Gelati obviously leading the way with pressures, but the number of guys that recorded a statistic.
So that's one of the things I liked most about our defensive front. Yes, the sack numbers weren't there, but they were really phenomenal when it came to run defense. They never got dominated out the line of scrimmage, no matter who we played, even some of the higher marquee opponents. No one really got after us. No team's star running back had a huge game against us. Like, if anyone ran for a huge chunky yardage, it was a quarterback getting away on a play where a linebacker had bad eyes, and that's not a play where where a D lineman's supposed to be able to make that play. So, huge years, and especially from some unexpected individuals. Like, I was really optimistic on Jordan Girard coming into the year, but him, Renee Conga, and then, of course, you had Jared Dawson, Ramon Puryear. Thor Griffith started slow, progressed and got better as the year went on. Huge year from the guys inside the middle, and I think they really anchored down and did a pretty damn good job on this defensive front.
Yeah, and even it's to the point where, like, some of those guys are coming back, and it's a big deal. Like Garad is coming back. That helps out with depth. Conga, I mean, when Conga first committed, I looked at his statistical profile from Rutgers, and I'm thinking, what do they know that I'm not seeing?
Right.
And then, like, right out of the gates, I mean, Conga's making a difference. I mean, yeah, he's the kind of defensive tackle where, like, he's not going to do a lot in terms of, like, the final stat line, but you watch the film and you watch him play, and he's getting in the mix, making a difference, eating up double teams, eating up blocks, affecting the pocket, affecting the pressure getting on the quarterback, all that good stuff. Like, he was one of the more underrated components to the success of the defensive line, and getting both him and Jordan Garad back for next year is a massive development.
One thing for me that was, I mean, we're all talking positives here, but one thing that was frustrating for me, and I was definitely wrong in this, I was beating my chest on this throughout the offseason, was seeing Ashton in a 0 or a 3 or any of those interior techniques just to, maybe provide for more pressure on the outside from someone other than Ashton. I didn't think that worked at all. I was so happy whenever we moved away from that. It made sense in my head because of Ashton's explosiveness and how he comes off the ball, how much he squats, just being a big, strong guy. I thought it would work out well, especially with his pass rush moves, but obviously it did not, and was happy to see him move back out to full-time outside, rushing on the edge towards the end of the year.
Certainly wasn't for a lack of trying, though.
No.
It's certainly for sure.
It's good to know they listen to the pod.
You know what? Mike linebacker. Let's try that, too. How about that? We'll see if we can just put him at cornerback. I know. It's just, seeing like it's really hilarious to see how far they went to try to make it stick. In reality, it was like, all right, just let him play where he's
let's
really
just play it. Yeah. But, I mean, it's still, even like now, Jacob, we talk about it, it like tickles my tongue. Like, it's like,
hindsight's 2020, right? I mean, it sounded like a good idea ultimately, but ultimately I mentioned you have all these pass rushers that get sacked. What did I say? 10 guys on the defensive line, but bunch of guys, right? Like, nobody really stepped up. Like, it felt like in 2023, and the statistics bared it out, that Mason Reiger and some of the other guys provided a complimentary pass rush to Ashton that allowed for him to play the way that he did. Now, defenses weren't as cued in on him as they were in 2024, and we know he struggled with that. He struggled with the double teams. He struggled with being held, with being chipped. Like, that was a real struggle, and in 23, other pass rushers were able to kind of step up. 24, there was a lot of guys who did, but most of them were on the interior, right? Tramel Logan only had 2, or only had 4 sacks. Miles Jernigan, I think, only had 1.5 sacks. A lot of these guys that they brought here to get after the quarterback just didn't give them anything to allow Ashton to thrive in some of those other roles. And then ultimately it's like, all right, let's just put him back to what he's good at, and let's get him back in his natural spot.
I will say this, though, and I completely get it. Like, yeah, Ashton gets held, and there's an emphasis on opposing offensive lines to, like, cater to him and erase him from, the game plan. But I mean, if you're this NFL talent that we think you are, you can overcome that.
Right.
Like,
you should.
When I hear fans like, "Oh, Ashton gets held every play," or blah blah blah, I'm like, I don't want to hear that.
I'm sure that never happened. I'm sure that never happened to Myles Garrett at Texas A&M. Ever.
Exactly. or name X edge rusher you can think of.
Exactly.
Right.
Ruben at Miami.
Is it a thing? Sure. I'm not going to say it's not, but like whenever I hear someone like mention that, it almost sounds like a cop out to me. Like,
it is. I mean, in a lot of ways, it is, Matt. I mean, us here at Louisville specifically have watched one of the best pass rushers in the country do it in Elvis Dumerville, and it's like, we're all old enough to remember. I'm the youngest one here. We're all old enough to remember Elvis Dumerville. Like we've all seen it. I mean, even guys like Devontae Fields, James Hearns, like these are dudes that got after the quarterback.
It was a frustrating. And while we're actually on this topic, it's probably the most frustrating good stat that constantly got thrown in our face this year. We're talking at the D line, the pressure numbers.
Yeah.
How Louisville's able to generate pressure on opposing quarterbacks on however many percent of the snaps.
Pressure just means they're getting the ball off.
Exactly! And it's so frustrating because it's like you're so close so many times. Just get them down! Right. And then you'll have plays where either Kevin Jennings slips away and then it turns into a 30-yard run, or Cam Ward slips away and then he's able to read a novel in the backfield and then hits Restrepo downfield and torches us again.
It reminds me of that old State Farm commercial where they had the fisherman with $1.
Yeah.
Oh, you gotta be quicker than that.
And it sucks to be irritated about a stat because, like, yes, generating pressure, generating havoc, that's a good thing. Get home, man.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so many times they slipped. They tripped the quarterback, but he didn't fall down. I mean, it was like they were leading the country in missed sacks. I mean, if that was a statistic, they would have been right there. I mean, they got into the backfield enough to make it feel like, man, this is a really good pass rush. But then if you're like, all right, tracking the actual sack statistic, not so much. And it was extremely frustrating because certainly, again, wasn't for a lack of helping or executing. I think those guys got there, right? They were there. They just couldn't bring him down. And when I say execution, obviously the sack is the ultimate execution. But I'm saying, like, it's not as if anyone was so outlandishly bad, right? Like, everyone was playing within their spots. They just didn't make the play.
They didn't come under control. Like, that's the big thing you hear in a meeting room anytime you're talking with defense and guys missing sacks is come under control. Settle your feet, get skinny and come under control. That's what they'll always tell you when you're blitzing or anything. And it's just none of the guys ever settled their feet. It was always, we're unbalanced here, leaning too much on a front foot and causes us to slip, or the quarterback steps up and we just can't quite get there. It was definitely very, very frustrating, especially since I'm an avid Jacob Sack watcher.
That's right. Hey now. Be careful.
I'm an average Jacob.
Give me the sponsorship.
Just don't ask me to cough twice. You can watch, just don't touch. But
what's wrong with that?
This group, I mean, it was one of the other things that they really struggled with also in 2023 when you over pursue and your angles are bad. It allows for what? What opens up?
Holes.
The holes, right, exactly. The holes open up and the quarterback says, "Phew," right? Like straight up the middle. And we saw that Austin Peay. We saw that Jacksonville State. We saw that in Georgia Tech. We saw that in Notre Dame. We saw that at SMU, so on and so forth. They eventually kind of self-corrected a little bit. That was a huge issue for this team. And I'm hoping heading into next year, it's going to be really interesting to see what this pass rush looks like without an Ashton Gelati and kind of how they draw it up to be more successful as a group without kind of a star. You have Lubin, you have Clowney, you have, a ton of interior defensive linemen, but it's going to be really interesting to see what they do.
See, I'm excited, Jacob, in that point because I want them to all buy into what we're doing as a defense and be able to get creative as a defensive line. Your stunts, things like that, that's how you confuse the offensive line a lot. I mean, if you run plenty of stunts all the time, if you run 2 or 3 stunts consistently, they'll be sitting there wondering what the hell. They'll know you're not running straight off the ball. It's going to be confusing.
Just to sort of put a little bit of a cherry on top, because I feel like we were really picking on the defensive line, I just want to go back and reiterate again, it's exceptionally frustrating because they were so good against for lack of a better term, the scheduled run game of opposing teams. Like, you look at Notre Dame and you look at SMU. Jeremiah Love, we saw what he did to phenomenal teams in the playoffs. Look at him running over 3 guys to get touchdowns against Penn State while injured. Louisville held him to 34 yards, just like 3 yards a carry. They bottled up Brashard Smith also. They held him to just 52 yards.
Yeah.
Like, they could handle elite running backs. It's just when mobile quarterbacks were able to escape and get out of the pocket, that's when they got killed by Kevin Jennings. Riley Leonard didn't even really beat him up that much. I think they only gave up like 50 yards to him. But it's frustrating because they were so good in the run game, but couldn't get home, and that led to a lot of plays where we got gashed.
Yeah, Stanford game. Looking at you. I mean, the run game was 83 yards that they held Stanford to.
Can we just bottle Stanford up in the same 2018 bottle I have? Like, I'll gladly take one more game in that bottle and just put the cap on top.
Like, what are you talking about? We were 2-11 that year.
Yeah,
like, what are you talking about? No, there's no way. But yeah, this group was fantastic when it came to that, and I feel like they have been. Right? You go back to some of the big games last year when they played, really strong run games. They've been able to put together. And constantly prove. Now, there's also, if you go back to this season, if you're a listener of this show every week, you're like, wait a minute, hold on. I'm going to say that's cap, because in my head, I think back to you all going through the film against Notre Dame, and I think about what that looks like, being dominated. Now, some of that was more linebackers, some of that, right? But, like, there was bad film this year in part. So, I want to make sure
what did I say? That the O-line and D-line improved throughout the year. So you mentioned Notre Dame. That's early in the year, Jacob.
That's right.
Short-term memory. What have you done for me lately? Bowl game was awesome.
Improvement means there was a low point that you had to get better from.
That's exactly
Bingo,
right.
Matt.
That's exactly right. All right, well, before we transition over to the offensive line, Matt, is there anything, I know you've got some good PFF data here, but is there anything that stands out to you? Actually, you know what? Hold on. Before we transition to the offensive line, we got to talk about Ramon Puryear. Hold on a second. Let me put some respect on that man's name. Hold on. Let's talk about this for a second. Ramon Puryear.
That's another jersey. Earlier. That's another jersey we need for the Pink.
We got to have it. And I feel like if there was ever a show or, media or whatever you want to label 4 dudes showing up drinking beer and calling football, whatever you want to call us, to get a jersey from him, it's us, because I went to Eastern High School. Ramon, if you're listening, man, that jersey, just put that thing in the mail. Let's go get that in the studio.
Get you a P.O. box.
Ramon and I played for Ramon's high school coach was my middle school coach as well. So we
got connections, right? It's all about
6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, baby.
That's exactly right, man. But you've got to talk about Ramon Puryear when you talk about this defensive line, because one, it's very rare that a player plays in 70 games, I think is what his final game count was. It was 69 at one point. I'm like, that would be hilarious if that's what it ended on. It would be really funny. But I think it was
it's even funnier that I can barely make it to 1.
Yeah. Still, man, hey, that man put on for the walk-ons. And for him to become he's never been like a dominant player. I don't even think he's ever been consistently a starter. It's been in and out when he has. But for him to play in as many games as he has, and for him this season to have the impact he did, where he did what? He scored 3 freaking touchdowns, man. Did Penny Boone score 3 touchdowns this year? I'm trying to think of just different players offensively that would score touchdowns that might have some skin in the game here. But, I mean, come on, man. You're talking about defensive player, right place, right time. That is just, I mean, come on, man. Kudos to him.
I'm very surprised that Ramon didn't win the Bullsworth walk-on of the, I think it's called the Bullsworth. I might be wrong. There's a walk-on of the year. You had to start as a walk-on. You're a scholarship player at the end by a senior. It's an award for it. I'm very shocked that Ramon didn't at least receive a nomination having 3 touchdowns.
I thought you still had to remain a walk-on to get.
Is that what it is? I thought it was like you start as a walk-on. Yeah. See, that's where I come to you, Matt. You're Big J, not me.
I'm just a walk-on.
That's not fair. I'm just a walk-on. That's not fair.
So I got.
So if anyone should know, it should be you.
Whoa!
Right,
No. 2 ACL tears. That's where you get. No, that's where you're wrong.
All right, fellas. So I've got a quick off-the-cuff game for you. I'm going to name a Louisville player, and you're going to tell me if Ramon Puryear scored more, less, or equal touchdowns to them.
Okay. Yes.
So if you've got stat sheets up, close them down.
Okay.
We're going to start things
What's
off.
that?
Kewan Brown.
More.
I want to say less.
I'm going to go more. Yeah, I'm going to go more. Yeah.
I started y'all off with a trick question. It's tied at 3.
I was going to say.
Who is this guy? Who is this guy?
All right. Chris Bell.
No, less.
Yeah, less.
Less.
Chris Bell only had 4 touchdowns, so it is less by
okay.
1.
Well, you tried to trick me again. I'm not falling.
All right, Colin Lacey.
More.
Now, limited playing time for Colin
More.
Lacey.
Yeah, he had more.
He had more.
No. Ramon had
Yeah,
more.
Ramon had more.
Ramon had more.
He had one more touchdown than Lacey.
Yeah,
Lacey
yeah.
had 2. Don Chaney.
Oh, that's a tough one, man. Because
I think
Chaney
he
was
had
like
more.
Chaney was the 1 yard warrior, man. Like if you want to win, put Donald Chaney in for 1 yard.
I think he had more.
I think Ramon had more.
I'm gonna say Chaney had more.
That was also a push. 3
Damn it.
touchdowns for
You're
Don
a
Chaney.
What's a
No,
Mario?
I don't like
What's
this
a
game anymore.
Yeah, right. What's a Mari Huggins Bruce? What's him compared to Ramon? That's a decent one.
Ramon's got Huggy. Huggy didn't get in the end zone. He got brought down at he might have led the team in getting brought down inside the 5 this year.
Kariski. What's Kariski and Ramon's numbers next to each other?
I believe Nate Dogg also had 3, so they were tied.
That's wild. I mean, Ramon had hang the jersey up now, Eastern.
Right.
Well, and the funny thing, yes, the touchdown anomaly stat is awesome, but also he was such a versatile player on that D line. When there were reps when Ashton wasn't in, they were able to kick him out over to that edge position where he was able to play, and it wasn't a liability. He played inside on the interior D line, made plays there as well. This dude was a Swiss Army knife and made plays all year long. So, yeah, big shout out to Eastern Eagle, Ramon
That's right,
Puryear.
man. Yes. That's exactly right. I love to hear that. Okay. Any statistics, Matt, back to my original question before we transition to the offensive line. Anything that stands out
I don't
for
think
you?
there's any more Ramon.
I mean,
there's
the
no more
main,
Ramon
the
stats
main
we can throw out.
Yeah, well, the main PFF stat that I have actually has to do with the offensive line. So, I'm ready to transition.
Okay. Well, let's start with that. Offensive line. What do we got?
We know that the offensive line had a little bit of an inconsistent start to the year between underperformance, injury, and whatnot. But they rounded very much into form towards the end of the year. And I'm very curious as to how PFF takes into account the fact that Tyler Shuck himself did very well in terms of not taking sacks. He and Jack Plummer are opposite ends of the spectrum.
And throwing the football or walking and
I've never
chewing
heard
gum?
you say truer things.
Who is going to get measured as a comparable in Louisville longer? Kenny Payne or Jack Plummer?
That's a good question. The measuring stick for forever, man. That's exactly right.
But anyway, so there's Chuck, who did very well at not taking sacks, and there's 2 superstar freshman running backs who are going to make any offensive line look better.
Right.
So looking at the season stats for the offensive line, in terms of pass blocking, they got the whole line got a grade of 67.2, which is close to above average. But
What's average again? Do you mind giving me just a refresher?
as a reminder, average in PFF is 60.
Thank you.
So this sounds like it's above average.
That's right.
Well,
Me, as a student athlete, would be beating my chest at the fact that that's above average.
It's kind of where I live.
Go
Right
ahead.
there. Slightly above
pass
average.
block grade of 67.2 is tied for 69th nice in the FBS, but it's also tied for 41st in power conference level, which isn't that great. It's just okay. And then with their run blocking grades, that's 64.8, which that's closer to average than above average, and that's 61st in the FBS and 33rd amongst the power conference teams. So
Help me understand that, man, because the running game was so good. I mean, I guess it goes to show you how good they were, right? The offensive line's tailing their success a little bit, I guess.
I think what it's suggesting is that the fact that Tyler Shuck's escapability combined with the running back's ability to, perform, I don't want to say masked the offensive line, because it's not like the O-line was bad. I mean, we saw with our own eyes that the offensive line got better. But it made them seem better than they actually were. That's what I'm taking away from these.
That's one thing I never thought about, Matt, was Tyler's ability to evade. Well, obviously, I'll think about it as I'm watching the game, but statistically wise and numbers wise with PFF, I never think about, are they taking into account how well Tyler avoids the pass rush?
Yeah, and that was one of the huge benefits of having a veteran quarterback like Tyler, is that how many times did we see no one was open, play was busted, I'm just going to throw this at a running back's feet, or I'm just going to very cavalierly underhand chuck this out of bounds to avoid getting sacked.
Can we leave that in 24?
A good quarter.
I have a feeling that won't be the case. I just have a feeling.
Dude,
I don't know,
between
man.
Malik, Jack, and now Tyler, I'm done with our capability of being able to throw the ball out of bounds. Done.
Like, I just stand up, while you're on the run, just chuck it into the third row.
Yeah.
Send a kid from
I'll throw
Sheboygan
it back,
home with
I
a souvenir.
promise. I'll throw it back, I promise.
So, like, when you have phenomenal players like Shuck with his intelligence being able to get the ball out, or dynamic, explosive playmakers like Brown and Watson, yeah, it can overcome a lot of warts, but you still have to at least be good to above average to make that happen. And let's not forget, they're also graded against the competition they played against, and Louisville played a few pretty damn good defensive lines this year. Like Clemson, those guys were no slouches. Notre Dame, fantastic. Kentucky, for all the warts their team had, we went into their house and kicked the shit out of their O-line. That was
Miami.
fit for D-line.
Miami's got the best D-line in the ACC.
And Miami.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they had very stiff competition, and that sort of leans in to the grade.
Yeah, that makes sense, but still, it is a little bit surprising to see it kind of grade out that low, because like you watch the season as it goes on, you think, okay, the offensive line looks, pretty good, but then see the grade and you're like, okay, maybe like, am I missing something? Like, did they not perform that well? Did my eyes deceive me? Am I getting older? Like, what's going on here?
You are getting older.
You are getting older, yeah. But I will say the one sack over the final 4 games. I forget what that statistic is at this point, but I mean, that's pretty telling, right? With the unit kind of flip-flopping in and out. I mean, a sack in 5-6 games is a sack in 5-6 games. I mean, that's a big deal.
While we're talking about sacks over a period stretch of games, because Louisville ranked very highly in the country. I believe they were tied for 14th in the nation, only giving up 15 sacks over the year. 9 of those came in 3 games.
Right.
Notre Dame, Miami, SMU. So against the most elite competition that they were going to face, a playoff team and then 2 teams that were flirting with, 2 playoff
the
teams and
national
one that was flirting
runner-up
with
and
it.
the ACC runner-up.
Right, exactly.
And then guys who are probably going to be on
frustrating to hear that number.
And you only lost by 7 points to both of them, so.
Incredibly frustrating. But it also goes to state, like, maybe it was just an above-average year for the guys, because you see, like, when they do play teams with elite edge rushers, guys were able to get home.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And one of the things I noted here that is worth mentioning. Now, it's not a reason for success or failure, but just worth mentioning is that the offensive line that they started with at the beginning of the year is not what they finished with. As I mentioned, there were a lot of injuries. Louisville had a ton of guys that either started, played, or were primary backups that went out this year, forcing the coaches to roll out completely new looks. Not even just that, right? You had injuries, but then you also had guys not playing well, as I mentioned. So you have kind of compounding issues. So Louisville starts the beginning of the year, and you feel really good about Monroe Mills, Michael Gonzalez, Pete Niagara, Austin Collins, and Jonathan Mendoza. You feel good about that, or at least some variation of that, right? Final starting 5 is Trevante Sylvester, which, as I mentioned, I don't necessarily know if anybody expected him to become kind of the left tackle to anchor your offensive line. Now, again, look at the numbers and take of that what you will, but played well when called upon. Michael Gonzalez and Pete Niagara, consistent, but you had Austin Collins banged up in and out of the lineup. So you had Renato Brown, who had come back from being injured. And then you have Monroe Mills, who was banged up and playing hurt out at the right tackle because of the fact that you had Jonathan Mendoza not playing well. You didn't have a healthy Rasheed Miller. So, I mean, it really was, what can we do to put a guy here and fit here? It was a big Tetris puzzle for Coach. And so, considering all things, with Louisville getting some of the wins that they did, you mentioned the Clemson game, and for Louisville to have the run offense that they had, you made do with what you had. You didn't over-succeed, but you certainly didn't fail. So you kind of lived in the land of average, which when you look at the season, I think it kind of tracks.
Also, it was a weird sort of trying to get guys and having them in situations where they play their best game. Like Matt, little inside baseball, Matt's got some of the PFF numbers for some of the individual players. And like Austin Collins, you mentioned him. One of my favorite O-linemen on the team, not just a hometown kid, but just absolute great social follow. He graded out at 85 for pass pro. That's friggin' incredible for an interior lineman.
Yeah.
Now, run pro, not so much, but again, it's about getting guys in situations where they can succeed. And of course, he got banged up as the year went on, so we couldn't see him the whole time. So it was a weird sort of situation, and I guess above average is a good way to just describe the unit as a whole for the season.
I was really happy to see Renato Brown. I know he didn't have the season that I'm sure we wanted, that he wanted as, for himself collectively as a player, but I'm just happy to see that he was able to come back from that injury and be half the player that he was. I mean, I'm sure with a full offseason this year, full rehab on the body, everything should be done with the knee, that he will be a lot better come this season than he was last. But him, Austin Collins was fun to watch. Some of the PFF numbers are definitely surprising, but I'm also of the camp of, how much does PFF know our offense?
Right.
So
It's directional.
It's directional. You know who really impressed me this year? Pete Nigra. Coming in from playing the MAC, didn't even make an all-MAC team as a transfer. He comes in and he plays some pretty damn good ball this year. Matched up against a lot of really good interior defensive linemen.
Big shoes to fill, too.
Put together a damn good,
We've had a collective, very good run of centers the past however many years between him, Cole Bentley, amongst other, just plenty of good.
So, hats off Pete Nigra. Hell of a season. Very impressed by him this year.
Yeah, and again, you got to talk about some of the injuries and guys battling back, right? I know Monroe Mills has ultimately now left and is off to Virginia, but for him to have that injury, we saw other guys get injured, and not pointing fingers by any means. Obviously, love having Colin Lacey back, and everyone's situation is different, but we saw other guys get injured and say, all right, I'm going to shut it down, right? I'm going to redshirt. I'm going to come back next year. Obviously, he had eligibility, but fought, rehabbed, got back out on the field, got put at right tackle after starting the season at left tackle. I mean, kudos to him for, really kind of staying with it. Go ahead.
Maybe this is just a weird thought, but did anyone else think he played way better at right tackle?
He definitely did.
Even while he was playing injured? That was wild to me.
It's also subjective when you're replacing someone who's not playing well. Like, playing well looks a little bit different. You're like, okay, but he definitely wasn't great on the left side early on in the year. None of them really, were. It really was an up and down year.
It's a lot of pressure to be over there, the lone man left tackle. I mean, it's almost like going ISO basketball the entire time,
Especially with the pressure of, like, I can't let him get hurt. I can't be that guy.
That's the blind side, bro. That's the blind side, yeah.
Right. It's added pressure, too, with Tyler Shuck. So, overall, though, I thought, the guys, that they played well, and that they obviously established what they needed to up front to give Isaac Brown, to give Duke Watson, to give Tyler Shuck the opportunity to have the season they have, right? You don't have the big passing game with Ja'Cory Brooks without an offensive line that can at least hold up, right, and keep Tyler Shuck upright. And you don't have a run game if you don't have some maulers up front, whether it be just a physical ground and pound or with some more stretch, zone type runs where you're getting out in space, which we saw these guys kind of thrive with a little bit. So it's going to be a new era of offensive linemen, though. Keith, Vince, you mentioned Renato Brown coming back. I mean, it's going to be 14 guys this spring really competing for however many spots. It'll be interesting to see if all of these guys end up back next year or if you're running out a group, that looks a little bit different. I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of these guys, how could you not be enticed to come back, even if you're a fringe guy that's flirting with that starting spot, and let's say you even lose your starting spot, or you don't beat out the guy that's in front of you now in spring or fall camp. With the amount of injuries and change-ups and things that we've had to the offensive line, why would you not play your cards out if you think you're putting in the work?
It's going to be a fascinating competition come the spring because you've got Rasheed Miller coming back. You've got Renato Brown, who could play tackle, coming back. You've got Trevonta Sylvester. You've got Mac Pounders. You've got a few other guys as well. And then you're bringing in guys like
Nair Jackson.
Yeah.
Nair Jackson. There we go. I'm really excited about him too. And he's got multiple years of eligibility. So
does Jordan Church. So does Carter Guillaume.
Yeah.
Or
Gilliam.
I probably butchered the
Gilliam.
Man, I was going to say, we went way opposite of the last time we were talking
Gilliam
about
is his last name. He is a St. Edward kid.
Carter G.
And now we got Flores coming in now, who's probably going to provide some center depth with Vic Cutler also coming back.
Yeah.
So, how many guys do you expect to leave after spring ball?
I'm the worst person to ask that.
3.5 is what I'm putting the Matt. I'm putting it at
optimistic.
3.5. That's the number I'll give you because I can think of at least 3 of
While
my
Matt
head.
Matt ponders this, I'm gonna say none because I'm that guy. I'm just like
Vince.
nobody. What are we talking about? This is football.
I'm going to take the under only because I'm going to say right at 3 because, there's always a fair amount of offensive linemen on a Brom roster, but I mean, there's a lot of linemen.
And a lot of guys who have 1 year that I know of eligibility left.
All it will take for them to see that bill from the first dinner of having this many offensive linemen. They'll be like, all right, we got to cut somebody here.
That's a good way to put it. Okay, last thing I want to do here on the show, we're going to do this at the end of each of these positional breakdowns here. We're going to go with the MVP from the unit. We're looking at the big skill tonight in the trenches, fellas. MVP, offense or defense. You can go either way. I'm going to go first here, and we can have repeats. We don't have to stick to our usual format because I think it's kind of hard sometimes to pick 4 MVPs in a group. That's not realistic.
Pick somebody different.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm gonna jump off of a ledge here with the hottest take, and I'm gonna take Ashton Gelati as my MVP.
Wow, careful out there on that bridge.
Your seat is very hot, isn't it, Jacob?
Right. I just blew your mind with my hot take. But look, when you're the guy that everybody is looking to and watching from an offense perspective and game plan, and you're still able to get into the backfield the way that you did. Now, look, I'll be the first to tell you it was a very rough go for the sack watch this year because there was not a lot of sacks happening consistently from the same people. I mean, it was, look, you got all these guys entering the club, but right then they're all sitting. Nobody ever got a drink. Nobody's hanging out, right? They're all just kind of there. And for Ashton, he was consistently at least getting pressure. They were putting him in a lot of places that he had no business being. You talked about that earlier. But he continued to be that consistent force game in and game out. I would have loved to have seen more production, but overall, I thought that he was the anchor for that defense. The attention on him allowed all the other guys to benefit and do what they did this year. So I'm going Ashton Gelati.
I'm going to go on the offensive line. I'm going to go with Monroe Mills just because he performed at a very high level. I think he was probably the best offensive lineman they had this season. And not only that, he did a complete position switch from left tackle to right tackle, and it's not just as simple as just mirroring your technique. You have to basically rewire your brain to be able to operate at a high level, and that's exactly what he did, and he did it while hurt. So I'm going to go with Monroe Mills.
Well, I'll stay on the offensive side of the ball, and I'm going to go with Pete Nigra because you stepping in huge shoes to fill. You're coming into a center position. You're not the most touted guy coming out of the portal, so you don't know what you're really going to come out and get, and he really over-delivered on any expectations I had, and I'm confident with him coming back that center, that's a position of strength on next year's team. So Nigra will be my pick. So Vince, let's see, you going to repeat or are you going to go original?
No, I'm going original. I'm going original twice because I will be damned if Ramon Puryear gets left off any list that we do involving MVPs for the defensive line. So, Ramon, you get my defensive line MVP just for 3 touchdowns, playing a
Let's go.
phenomenal year.
Yeah.
I mean, that was awesome. But also, I want to give Renato Brown a shout out because of how hard it is to come off that injury and to be able to rehab throughout the year, knowing in the back of your head that somebody else took your spot. There's no getting that spot back in fall camp because it is solidified from what we looked at and what we saw. And all that is left is for you to sit there and put work in and to grind your ass and continue to grind until you get back to that point to where you're capable of playing full speed. And he finally got to that. And now the PFF grade, I'm sure, doesn't grade out to exactly what you want. But, to be able to come back from that injury and compete at a high level, I'm excited for what the future holds with him. And like I said, I'll be damned if Ramon Puryear gets left off.
Hell yeah, man.
That's involved with us.
Let's go. I love that, man. Well, it was definitely an interesting year and definitely a great place to jump off. A lot of different storylines and conversations to get into as we've recapped the offensive line and defensive line. We'll keep the conversation going. We've got more content from the Pink Seats podcast, as I mentioned. Get in here. Subscribe to the YouTube channel right below us here. If you're listening via audio, go ahead, subscribe, turn those notifications on, rate, review. We've got a lot of content rolling your way. We'll continue on with our breakdowns. We've got running backs, linebackers, tight ends, and quarterbacks in our next one here. And then we'll have some more special guests. So make sure you're tuned in. Jacob Lane, Matt McGavic, producer Keith, Vince Lococo, the Babe. I think that might be your new nickname, man. I'm here for it, man. I love it. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And until next time, go Cards.